Today's episode is brought to you by HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit inspiring confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. For resources, networking opportunities, and a strong community of women, visit HERdacity.org to learn more.
Welcome to HERdacious, a podcast for audacious women. Welcome one, welcome all to HERdacious, the podcast for audacious women looking to make some career moves. And HERdacious is one of those amazing resources to help you do it. My name's Lorelei, the happy host of this show, and today we're going to be talking about commanding a room. To join me in this epic conversation, I have a leader in women's issues, a champion of DEI work, and a lobbyist with TIAA, Caren Lock.
Thank you so much, Lorelei. How are you?
I am very well, Caren. How are you?
I'm just trying to stay cool in this Dallas weather. It's 107 degrees heat index, so very, very hot.
My gracious. All right, well, we're going to keep it cool today because we're going to be discussing public speaking and commanding a room. Now, Caren, our listeners might not know that you're an attorney. So I imagine that you had to develop your commanding a room skills pretty quickly and probably under quite a bit of pressure. Would you share with us some of those experiences?
Oh, absolutely. It would be a joy to go down memory lane. So I went to Baylor Law School, where we were all trained to be courtroom lawyers. Communication, advocacy skills are honed year after year. But most importantly, in the last year at Baylor Law School is something called practice court. Every Baylor lawyer knows this course, and it is the most challenging. You are taught to not just write the papers, but more importantly, to pretend that you're living a case through. So the best part about the course is it teaches you to have no fear. You're basically publicly humiliated multiple times. And most importantly, yes, but most importantly, you are taught to juggle many balls. So when you walk into a room, you have to evaluate the jury, you have to make objections, prepare a witness for cross-examination, put on evidence. What that does is it helps you kind of focus into multiple areas all at once and kind of get your spidey senses together. That's really what trial work is all about. But the best part of Baylor Law School is they teach you how to do that while you're trying to advocate and develop a story. So that's kind of what you and I are talking about, public speaking and commanding a room. One of my most fond memories is getting kicked out of class.
Why?
Because I was busy taking notes. The professor asked me a question. I looked up and said, "Excuse me, sir, could you repeat the question?" Immediately, the professor said, "You just need to leave the room."
Whoa.
If you cannot take notes at the same time that you're putting on a witness, evaluating a jury, making a record for objections, if you can't do two things, just two things, answer my question and take notes, how are you going to do all those things in a courtroom? He was right. I got kicked out. You will never forget that walk of shame in a different kind of way. You learn very quickly how to listen and evaluate everybody around you. And that's part of what commanding a room is all about.
Well, how can our listeners start to develop their commanding the room abilities?
Well, think about first and foremost that you literally have less than 30 seconds. Everybody thinks you have 90 seconds to make a good impression. You have less than 30 seconds. There was a study done recently that out of 2,000 Americans, 7 out of 10 Americans make the first impression of somebody before they even start talking. So remember that even before you start talking, somebody's already deciding whether or not they like you, they trust you, and then everything after that flows from it. Once you walk into a room, just being aware of who your audience is, what you're trying to convey, knowing what your end goal is critically important. Those are the basic objectives that you should do before you even go into a room. But there are so many differences, too, between what a woman does versus what a man does.
Ooh, let's unpack that a bit. Tell us a little bit more about the gender difference.
So first and foremost, it's important to recognize that leadership or commanding a room people perceive that to be a little different for men versus women. We have to be commanding yet soft so that we don't come across too abrasive. So it's a little bit more of a delicate balance. There are attributes that are placed on men being assertive, but yet kind of flip it around for women and can be perceived as bossy. Mm-hmm. So knowing that is critically important. So you have to be assertive, but a little bit softer, do it with a smile, coaching at the same time as you are asking for what you need, but not push too hard. So it's a little bit more of a dance, but it's something you can definitely learn. It's not a skill that you're born with and can never cultivate.
Well, on the topic of gender difference, let's pop into a little bit more intersectionality for a second. What about for women of color? What sort of challenges do they have in developing their commanding the room abilities?
So you now have being a woman as well as a woman of color. Generally, in my world, I am one of very few women of color in a room. So I have very little room for mistakes or missteps because people remember them. However, on the upside, if you do a good job, people immediately remember you because there's just so few of us. So I really try to lean in, definitely over-prepare. There's nothing better for your confidence than preparing and knowing exactly what you're asking for and knowing your data points, knowing all that you need to back up what you're asking from whoever you're talking to is critically important. But if you do it well, people will remember you and they actually will come back to you. I've had experiences where I see somebody and I may not recognize who they are, but because there's so few of me in a capital, and I do state lobbying, so there's so few of me in a capital, they immediately associate with me with TIAA. So that's the positive. The downside is hopefully I haven't totally messed up something in the past.
Oh, come on. All right. Well, I'm going to keep pulling on this gender difference thread for just a second. So gendered language is pretty common. I imagine you're very familiar with it, having gone through, communications training in law school. We see it everywhere. We see it in job titles, last names, colloquial terms, greetings, especially in foreign languages, and in the way we socialize men and women to speak differently, kind of like what you mentioned with the assertive versus bossy. And I think most of us understand that this comes out of historical patriarchy, where men were the norm and women were the other. So what do our professional women who are listening need to know about gendered language? I think especially including the use of passive language that is more often taught to women.
Absolutely. There are two different things I really want to point out. The first one is the intonation and the tone. When you are first starting out in a professional career, you have to learn to project. You have to use and push out your voice. When you're young, you hesitate. Sometimes you end a sentence with a question. So, for example, what I just did there, do you think it's a good idea? Asking is also another big problem. We always qualify everything with a question. When you end your tone or sentence with a question, you are conveying a message of insecurity and uncertainty. So that's the first thing we need to stop. My idea is to incorporate product A to product B, or my idea is to incorporate product A with product B. Mm-hmm. The two different endings will change the way you're conveying the message. So that's the first thing, is speaking and pushing out the words in an authoritative way. The second part is the use of the passive words, filler words. I'm going to go back to law school one more time.
Oh, gosh.
Because when I was in law school, I had the professor stand behind me with a ruler tapping me on the shoulder because I always use the word and. So I would connect the thought, use the word and to buy some time to think of whatever it is I'm saying, rather than just pausing, letting whatever thought or whatever message sinks in, and then go to the next one. So using some of the connector words, one of my pet peeves is like. I hear ladies or women use that word all the time.
Guilty.
Like this, like, do you understand what I'm saying? Well, that's the worst because you have now like, do you understand what I'm saying? So you have 3 different no-nos all in one place.
Give us some more.
Just. I hate the word just. I read an article about 5 years ago where they broke down using sentences incorporating just, even in simple emails. How's your day? I just want to ask you a question. The word just doesn't add any value. It is just a filler word. And what it looks like is you're questioning yourself. I have a question. I want to ask you what is going on. Just simple. Just cut the word
okay?
just.
Is this okay for me to ask?
Exactly. So that goes back to the intonation, that kind of squeaky, high tone voice is just not perceived as serious. So yesterday I was listening to an NPR article. The woman was a professor, but she spoke in such a pitchy little young girl voice. It was distracting. Something to think about if you are trying to command a room is to lower your tone, slow it down, project, push out, really basic kind of things you already know, but you don't think about when you're nervous. The other one is I'm sorry. Rather than saying excuse me or simply just jumping into the conversation, I see this in conferences and in meetings where women will say, excuse me, I'm sorry. Oh. Everything is I'm sorry. You're not really sorry. You just want to be heard. And if you want to be heard, just speak.
I appreciate all of the points you're bringing to light right now. And I think the clarification is wonderful. So I'm sorry, Caren. I just need to take a quick sponsor break. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Hi, Barbie here from Moonray, husband and wife indie pop duo. If you enjoy the intro music, we invite you to listen to our debut EP, Honeymoon, streaming now on all platforms. Visit www.moonray-music.com for more.
And we're back talking with Caren Lock about commanding a room. Caren, how else would you describe commanding a room?
It's also known in the professional world as executive presence.
Executive presence, right. So what other skills can women develop in the realm of executive presence?
Well, we spent a little bit of time already talking about communication, but I want to start off with how we act. When we walk into a room, coming in with gravitas, being able to be soft but yet assertive, walking into a room and immediately leaning in and shaking someone's hand. I gather with COVID, it's a little different.
Sure.
But eventually we'll get back to a point where we will have those interactions. It's critically important that you take a deep breath before you go into a room, lean in, immediately shake someone's hand, make eye contact. We always think about, I want to do all of those things, but we never do. It's so simple. Smile, make eye contact, lean in, and kind of come gently into someone's space. You don't want to be close to them, right in their face, but in our culture, it's totally doable to lean in just a little bit and shake someone's hand.
All right. Anything else?
Yes. The way we dress, kind of the image that you want people to perceive of you. I am a big believer that we are women and we should leverage that. I do not want to dress like a man. I am not a man. I'm a big believer in wearing bright colors, something that really distinguishes me from whatever else is in the room. I remember my mother teasing me because I had these leopard skin shoes and my mother kind of teased me about it. But my mother is 80 years old. I'm not.
Sure.
And I told her it's absolutely okay. They're pumps. They're not strappy, stilettos. But it's just something that's different and professional. I always think about coming and going. So coming into a room, what you look like. As you're exiting the room, what you look like. Big believer that when you leave the room, you want to look as poised and as polished as you walk into a room. So kind of check yourself before you walk into a room or before you're getting dressed in the morning. Basic primers, but never underestimate the importance. I have a couple of other little tips that are important. Women, I see it all the time, carrying big shoulder bags with their laptops, walking into a meeting. If you are looking to command a room, the last thing you want is be schlepping a big giant bag. Leave the bag somewhere else. I usually just carry my phone. And in the days where we still have business cards, eventually we may all just switch over to LinkedIn. But business cards, that's it. Don't leave your big bag behind.
Copy that. So what are some key things that we also need to know when we are practicing our executive presence?
The biggest one, listen. If I walk into a room and I have a meeting and I've done most of the talking, I have not accomplished what I needed. Well, I need to listen more. If you are a leader, you need to listen to the people beneath you, around you, people you're talking up to. We spend a lot of time talking. And of course, I say this as we are talking during your podcast, but listening is so much more important. If I can come out of a meeting having done only 25% of the talking, the other person feels like they are important and their opinions are valued. And I have collected so much data out of that meeting that I can use as a follow-up. And most importantly, when it comes to leadership, your staff or your team wants to know that they matter. And the only way you can show them they matter is to listen and respond accordingly. The other thing that I think is important is being authentic. For example, I'm Chinese. I can't hide from that. Sharing my experiences, sharing some of my vulnerabilities in the last year during COVID with the tide of the Asian violence made me more relatable to some of my friends and actually connected me with folks that I generally wouldn't have gotten to know outside of my business unit. So that is something that has helped. Leveraging something that is sensitive to yourself, but yet sharing it will bring back a lot more relationship building.
Well, that sounds a little bit like vulnerability to me.
Yes, it is. And I think I shared during one of my meetings about being afraid for my mother's safety because she lives with us. She is pushing 80 and she's 4'11" on her tippy toes. And I had so many people privately write back to me about how they were afraid for their own parents' safety. And I've developed relationships with folks outside of the Dallas office in New York and in Charlotte just because I was able to open up a little bit about who I am. Everybody has a personal story that would resonate with somebody. It's just being brave enough to share that part of you.
All right. Well, we have covered a lot of things that we need to be mindful of, that we need to work on developing in ourselves for our ability to command the room, for our executive professional presence. How do you recommend we better hone these skills?
First, you have to be able to be honest with yourself. So knowing that you want to be better is a really good first step. Developing a group of people around you, I call them my personal board of directors. They're honestly just good, old-fashioned girlfriends, but yet they're from across different sectors. So because I'm a lawyer and a lobbyist, I don't just want lawyers and lobbyists to tell me what is good that I'm doing or what is bad that I'm doing, because we speak differently. Lawyers speak differently than lobbyists. So building that little personal board of directors from women from different professions and different age group. So I have in my personal board of directors of girlfriends who are older than me and several that are younger than me, because I want to be relevant. I want to understand what's going on from all the different age groups. I think that's critically important. Reminding yourself that you are human and asking for help. So just leaning in, asking, hey, can you help me with something? I need you to check me. I need a gut check. I say that a lot. I need a gut check. So if you have an issue or you don't know if you're doing something right, have somebody check you out.
Oh, there's that vulnerability again.
I mean, that's what we're known for. Women are able to open up ourselves a little bit more. But I will say one of the best things that you could do for yourself is reaching back and pulling up. You will feel so good about yourself, and it will pay back in ways you will never, ever imagine.
Oh, I'm so glad you just mentioned that, because that leads me directly into my next question. How can we, as professionals, help other women around us when we see, them not leveraging the full depth and breadth of their experience? When they use gendered language, or when they're doing things that are possibly a professional hindrance to them, and we can see that? How do we reach out to those women?
Would do it definitely privately. I would never publicly call out any woman. I have certainly pulled aside young associates to remind them that Minnie Mouse sound that they're making is something they need to work on. And rather than saying it that way, simply just say you need to project differently, slow it down, and push air out a little bit more. Because when we speak in that squeaky tone, is because we are holding in the air. I would definitely do it privately. If you're in a room and you see that they are falling into the trap of allowing someone to speak over them or co-opting their opinion, I think it's a moral imperative for all women to help each other and jump in and save them, or interject and say, hey, Lorelei, your idea just now was so brilliant and totally spot on. So rather than letting somebody else take your idea, I've just given you credit and publicly acknowledging you. Hopefully, somebody will do that in return. But if you're trying to help other women in the profession, pulling them aside is the best way to do it. And just a little gentle coaching.
Wonderful. Well, lastly, share some resources with our listeners to help them find more success in their commanding the room and executive presence development.
So I have several. I love TED Talks. So as you can tell, I love podcasts. Love TED Talks. There is actually one. It's a playlist of 10 talks by women that everyone should watch. Just Google it. I make it a point at least once a day to just kind of, pop in, listen to 25, 30 minutes of a TED Talk. So that's critically important. One, it just broadens your span, and you can learn so much just by typing in and Googling that. I love Ann Chow's recent book. Ann Chow is the president and CEO of AT&T Business. She just had a book called The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias, and how to reframe bias, cultivate connection, and create high-performing teams.
Ooh.
That's one of my favorite books right now. I hope that you can go and find that and kind of learn from it. Recognizing where your own biases are, as well as others, will encourage you to connect more closely with others. And then lastly, take lessons. Even if your company isn't paying for it or your employer is not paying for it, take classes and courses, even if you have to do it out of your own pocket. Learning doesn't stop right after college. It doesn't. It continuously happens. So for example, I'm actually taking some classes on data privacy and trying to get a certification on cybersecurity, because I feel that that is an area that will have exponential growth.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Caren.
No, thank you. I really appreciate everything that you've done for giving voice to women and allowing me a little bit of time to share with your audience.
Oh my gosh, absolutely my pleasure. So we're going to transition into the end segment of our show, which is a Femme fact. And Caren, I think you're going to like the woman we're talking about today. I think y'all have a little bit in common. So in the middle of downtown Kansas City, Kansas, there lies a 2.5-acre plot of land that starkly contrasts the typical urban landscape and rush hour traffic expected from a 21st century United States city. It's a quiet, quaint, precious little area full of trees and greenery, which is now classified as a federal park. As stunning as it appears today, 150 years ago, the fight to preserve this land, now known as the Wyandotte National Burying Ground, was anything but pleasant. But there was one woman who made it her life's mission to ensure the longevity of the cemetery and resting place of some 400 to 600 members of her people's tribe, including her own mother. When we think of the concept of guardian angels, many of us conjure images of divine spirits with smiles and sparkly eyes. Well, Lyda Conley was sort of a guardian angel to the Wyandotte Nation in her efforts to defend their sacred burial ground. Except she pretty much abandoned the kind, sparkly vibe, instead opting for a more like, don't F with me or I'll shoot you in the foot sort of vibe. And I mean that literally. Eliza Burton Conley, nicknamed Lyda, was born in 1868 to her mother Elizabeth Burton Zane, a member of the Wyandotte Nation and granddaughter of the tribe's chief, and to her father, Andrew Conley, an English farmer who settled in Kansas. One of 4 sisters, Lyda lived an active childhood full of community involvement and constant learning. Her and her sisters frequently rode across the river to attend school in Kansas City, and Lyda herself trained as a telegraphic operator while also teaching. As Lyda entered adulthood, Kansas City began to urbanize, and talks of real estate development arose around what was then called the Huron Indian Cemetery as a prime option for development. Given that many of Lyda's family were buried on these grounds, including her mother and a sister, Lyda kept a close ear on these discussions, expecting the fate of her family's burial grounds to meet the same fate as much of other Native American land at the time. Lyda had already decided that she'd make the defense of her family and her people her life's work. Just as these speculative talks erupted, Lyda quickly acted in pursuit of an education in law where she would attain the legal skills and knowledge needed to win the court case she was expecting to represent. And that she did. Lyda attended the Kansas City School of Law, where she graduated as one of the only women in her class, and shortly thereafter became the first woman admitted to the Kansas bar in 1902. In 1906, Congress approved legislation allowing the Secretary of the Interior to sell the land where the Huron Cemetery was located, as well as permitting the bodies of those buried in that cemetery to be relocated to a different cemetery. With legal certification under her belt, Lyda filed for an injunction against the government to permanently prevent the sale, remarking that no lawyer could plead for the grave of my mother as I could. No lawyer could have the heart interest in the case that I have. And as a member of the Wyandotte Nation, Lyda fought tooth and nail to protect her ancestral burial grounds in Huron. Her and her sisters also erected what was dubbed Fort Conley, where the 3 surviving Conley sisters padlocked the gates and built a small building where they lived for years. There they kept watch over the land with weapons and signs warning off trespassers. Lyda later became the first Native American woman to argue a case in front of the Supreme Court. In the October term of 1909, Lyda appeared before the Supreme Court as both the plaintiff and attorney for her case, which is considered to be one of the first recorded instances in legal history. Lyda used her position as a descendant of the Wyandotte Nation to argue that the government could not sell their land, as stated in an 1855 treaty between the United States and the Wyandotte Nation, which disallowed the sale of their land and gave rights to descendants to enforce this agreement. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court denied her injunction and ruled that the sale was legal. But Lyda's efforts did not stop. Though she exhausted her legal option at the time, Lyda continued to guard the gates of the cemetery, fully armed and ready to party. Her slightly unconventional activities later caught the attention of Kansas State Senator Charles Curtis, who passed a bill in 1913 protecting the cemetery from all future development. Though a step in the right direction, Lyda was not yet satisfied. She spent the remainder of her lifetime optimizing protection of the cemetery via filing an injunction against the city, interfering with city officials that she felt were disrespecting the graves, and accruing a decent amount of jail time for trespassing. It is said that Lyda spent most of her days in or around the cemetery, guarding her people, just as she promised she would. Unfortunately, Lyda was murdered in a robbery in 1946 and is buried now next to her sister in Wyandotte National Burying Ground. As we've seen many a times before, legacy does not stray far from a lifetime of dedication. Activists who were inspired by Lyda's commitment successfully continued her work to preserve the cemetery, and in 1971, Huron was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Fast forward to 2017, that quaint little piece of land in downtown Kansas City that seems a little out of place in its industrial landscape will now live on in perpetuity, now designated as a National Historic Landmark, which officially protects it from all future development. Though she isn't here to experience it firsthand, Lyda was ultimately successful in her case to protect the legacy of her people, for her family, for her nation, and for those who would come after her. Lyda was a woman of incomparable class and civility, and she both literally and figuratively fought the law and won. Caren, it has been an absolute pleasure visiting with you today, and I really want to thank you for all the contributions you have gifted to our audience. Your executive presence is badass, and we appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Now, if y'all enjoyed this show, please subscribe, follow, whatever your podcast option asks you to do, and maybe even share with a friend or a colleague who might need a little professional support along their career journeys. I think they might appreciate it, and I know I will. You are welcome to drop us a line at HERdacous at HERdacity.org, or you can, send us a review, any of that jazz. So my name was Lorelei, and this was HERdacous. Until next time, you don't have to go out and fight the law and win, but show up, command the room, and own your space. You deserve it, and your professional career will thank you for it.